You could buy a house in Australia right now for $50,000. Not in some imaginary deal. Not at an auction nobody showed up to. A real house, on a real street, with a real address, listed on the market today. And the reason nobody is touching it has nothing to do with the price. Across this country, there are towns where the property market hasn't just slowed down. It has collapsed entirely. Where banks refuse to write mortgages. Where the government itself is paying people to leave and never come back. Where the last resident wasn't someone who chose to go, he was forcibly removed by the state. These are not remote historical curiosities. Some of these stories are unfolding right now, in 2026, in towns you might have driven through, invested in, or considered moving to. And what's happening in each of them reveals something deeply unsettling about the Australian property dream that nobody in the real estate industry wants you to understand. Over 2,000 people are dead because one of these towns existed. Another was physically picked up and moved to higher ground. And then the original site flooded again anyway. One has a scheduled date, October 2029, when its entire reason for existing will be switched off forever. And buyers already know it. Today, we count down 10 Australian towns where nobody is buying homes anymore. We go from number 10 all the way down to the one story that changes how you think about property and about this country permanently. Number 10, Queenstown, Tasmania. Imagine standing on a hillside and looking at mountains that have no trees. Not just fewer trees, no trees at all. Bare rock in shades of rust, copper, ochre, and deep burnt orange, stretching across an entire mountain range as far as you can see. It looks like Mars. It looks like a film set. It is, in fact, a small town in Western Tasmania called Queenstown. And those bare mountains are what a century of prosperity looks like when the bill finally comes due. At its peak, Queenstown was one of Australia's most productive mining towns. The copper deposits beneath it were among the richest ever found in the Southern Hemisphere. And for over a century, the smelters ran day and night, processing ore and pumping sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere until every plant, every tree, and every living thing on the surrounding hillsides was chemically destroyed. The acid rain fell for decades. The soil was stripped bare. And then, as always with these stories, the industry shrank. Today, Queenstown's population sits at around 1,808 people, down from 5,000 at its peak. The median house price is $220,000, one of the cheapest in the entire country. Transactions are thin, buyer interest is minimal, and the town exists in a kind of permanent suspended state between its industrial past and a tourism future that has never fully arrived. The bare mountains are extraordinary to look at, but they are also the reason the air quality studies exist, the reason property values never recovered, and the reason that for every visitor who arrives and says, "This is extraordinary," there is a local who wonders when the next one is leaving. That $220,000 price tag isn't a bargain, it's a verdict. Number 9, Broken Hill, New South Wales. Nobody announces when a city begins to die. There is no press conference, no official declaration, no single event you can point to and say, that was the day. With Broken Hill, the death has been unfolding for 7 decades, and it is still unfolding right now. In 1954, Broken Hill was home to 31,351 people. It was one of the most significant industrial cities in Australia. The birthplace of BHP, the town that built the union movement, the city that produced more lead, zinc, and silver than almost anywhere on Earth. By June 2025, the population had fallen to 17,515. Nearly half the city has left, and the rate of departure, approximately 0.48% per year, shows no sign of stopping. The median house price in Broken Hill sits somewhere between $190,000 and $226,000. On paper, that looks like affordability. In practice, it signals something more troubling. A market where even the cheapest prices in New South Wales cannot attract enough buyers to generate meaningful transaction volumes. The mining operation still runs, but at a scale that employs a fraction of what it once did. The population is aging. Young people leave for Sydney, for Adelaide, for anywhere with more opportunity. And the question that sits under every property decision in Broken Hill is the one nobody says out loud at an auction. Who is going to buy this house in 20 years? Nobody has a good answer. The market already knows it. Number 8. Coober Pedy, South Australia. Coober Pedy is one of the most genuinely strange places on the planet. Roughly 60% of its residents live underground, in homes carved directly into hillsides, with tunneled hallways, dugout bedrooms, and no windows facing the 50-degree summer heat above. There are underground churches, underground hotels, underground bars, and underground art galleries. It produces over 70% of the world's opals and looks, from above, like the surface of the moon. It is also slowly emptying. From a population of approximately 3,500 in the early 2000s, Coober Pedy has declined to somewhere between 1,500 and 1,762 people today, a fall of more than 50% in 25 years. The opal market, which once sustained thousands of independent miners, has been in structural decline for years as prices fluctuate and easily accessible deposits run thinner. But the property story has an added layer of strangeness that sets Coober Pedy apart from any other town on this list. Those famous underground dugout homes, the ones that make every documentary crew's highlight reel, are effectively impossible to finance through conventional lenders. Banks don't know how to value a home with no roof, no external walls, and no standard structural characteristics. Mortgage applications on dugout properties are frequently refused outright, making the market functionally cash only for the majority of buyers. You have a town where homes are cheap, visually astonishing, and structurally unique, and the financial system simply cannot accommodate them. The South Australia Outback region recorded a property price decline of 20.3% in a single recent reporting period. That is not a blip, that is an industry signal. Before we get into the next 5, and these are the ones that get genuinely difficult. If this is the kind of Australian story you want more of, hit subscribe right now. Not for the algorithm, because the second half of this list gets into floods, asbestos, and a government program quietly paying Australians to abandon their own homes. You do not want to miss it. Number 7. Collie, Western Australia. Every town on this list has already experienced its collapse. Collie is different. Collie knows exactly when its world ends, and that date is October 2029. That is when the Western Australian government has committed to closing all state-owned coal-fired power plants in the region. When that happens, approximately 1,300 coal industry jobs disappear from a town with a total population of roughly 7,000 people. Do the mathematics on that. 1 in every 5 or 6 people in Collie is directly employed in an industry that the government has already scheduled for closure. The unemployment rate was already sitting at 5.6% as of December 2024, and working age residents have already begun leaving in anticipation of what's coming. The property market in Collie reflects this with brutal honesty. Who buys a home in a town where 1,300 jobs evaporate in 3 years? Investors require confidence in future demand. Owner-occupiers need to believe the town has a future. And right now, despite genuinely earnest government promises about a just transition, retraining programs, renewable energy projects, new industries, the people who actually live in Collie are not convinced the replacement jobs will arrive before the coal jobs disappear. The workers there are not reckless or uninformed. They are rational. They are reading the same headlines you are. They are watching projects get delayed, funding rounds get pushed back, and announcement dates quietly drift. And they are making property decisions accordingly. Collie is the most real-time case study in this entire video of what a property market looks like when an entire community can see its own deadline approaching. Number 6, Lee Creek, South Australia. Most ghost towns die because something went wrong. Lee Creek is haunting precisely because everything went right and then stopped. The South Australian government built Lee Creek from nothing in the 1980s as a planned company town to house workers at the Alinta energy coal mine. They did it properly. Full residential streets, a hospital, a school, a swimming pool, a golf course, a supermarket, hundreds of identical government-built houses for hundreds of families. At its peak, approximately 2,000 people called it home. And then on November 17th, 2015, Alinta Energy closed the mine. The population collapsed from 2,000 to approximately 100 people, not over a decade, not over a generation, within 12 months. The infrastructure is still there, all of it. The hospital, the pool, the streets lined with houses that have furniture still inside them, a supermarket car park with no cars. The town didn't decay, it simply emptied. And the roughly 100 people who stayed, retirees, caretakers, people who simply refused to be displaced from the place they'd spent their lives, exist inside a perfectly preserved shell of a community that nobody is coming back to. There is no meaningful property market in Lee Creek. There are no buyers. The question of what the government owes to communities it creates and then abandons has never been convincingly answered. Lee Creek just keeps asking it, quietly in the South Australian outback, surrounded by houses that have nobody in them. Number 5, Hopetoun and Ravensthorpe, Western Australia. $3.7 billion. That is what BHP Billiton spent constructing the Ravensthorpe nickel mine in the remote southwest of Western Australia. They built the processing facility. They built the infrastructure. Families packed up their lives from cities across Australia and moved to Hopetoun, a coastal town of 450 people that swelled to over 1,100 during construction, on the basis of long-term employment promises from one of the largest mining companies in the world. The mine opened in April 2008. It closed in January 2009. 8 months. Not 8 years. 8 months. BHP cited falling nickel prices during the global financial crisis and walked away from a $3.7 billion investment like it was a failed restaurant. The families left behind had no market for their homes. There were no buyers, not at any price, because there was no industry, no employment, and no reason for anyone to live there anymore. What happened next was extraordinary and virtually unprecedented in Australian corporate history. BHP was forced to buy back homes from stranded workers at pre-agreed prices. A mining company formally compensating a community for destroyed property values. It had never really happened before. The fact that it happened at all tells you everything about how completely and suddenly a property market can be annihilated. Not weakened, not softened, annihilated. In 8 months. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment. Every town we have covered so far, Queenstown, Broken Hill, Coober Pedy, Collie, Lee Creek, Hopetoun, every single one of them is a mining story. Different minerals, different timelines, different levels of corporate culpability, but the same fundamental truth. Australia has spent 150 years building towns around holes in the ground and then acting surprised when the holes run out. The next 4 towns on this list are different. The forces destroying them are not beneath the earth. They are above it, in the floodwaters, in the air, and in a town that the law has made illegal to inhabit. These are the ones that do not have a historical endpoint. These are the ones that are still happening. Number 4, Grantham, Queensland. On January 10th, 2011, a wall of water swept through the small Lockyer Valley town of Grantham, Queensland. It killed 12 people. It destroyed 29 houses completely. It severely damaged 130 more. And in its aftermath, the community made a decision that had never been made in modern Australian history. They moved the town. The Lockyer Valley Regional Council purchased 485 hectares of elevated cattle land above the floodplain and offered every affected resident the chance to physically relocate their home to higher ground. Over 70 homes took up the offer. The old Grantham, the original site, was not demolished. It was not cleaned up and rezoned. It was simply left. And today, if you drive out there, you can walk among empty concrete slabs where houses once stood, driveways that lead to nothing, letterboxes with no homes behind them, and overgrown gardens slowly reclaiming foundations. The property market for old Grantham is not depressed or slow. It is non-existent. Nobody wants to buy on a floodplain that killed a dozen people and displaced an entire community. Then, in 2022, the Lockyer Valley flooded again. The old Grantham site went underwater. Again, the people who had moved to higher ground watched the water cover the foundations of their old homes for the second time and understood with absolute certainty that they had made the right call. A handful of residents had refused to relocate, had stayed in old Grantham through sentiment, stubbornness, or financial necessity. As of 2026, the property market down there remains essentially frozen. The lesson Grantham teaches is the simplest of any town on this list. The market already knows what the floodwaters know. And it decided years ago. Number 3, Lismore, New South Wales. On February 28, 2022, the rain gauge at Lismore peaked at 14.4 metres. The highest floodwaters in the city's recorded history. Almost 2,000 homes were affected. Approximately 75% of businesses were damaged or destroyed. Residents were rescued by boat from the roofs of their houses. The brown water filled second stories, swallowed cars, and turned the central business district into an inland sea. And when the water receded and the damage assessments came in, something happened to the Lismore property market that had never happened to a city of its size in Australia. It broke. Median house prices fell from $540,000 to $375,000 in a single quarter. Land values in flood-affected zones dropped by up to 60%. Insurance premiums in parts of the city became so extreme that homes became functionally uninsurable. Not theoretically, not eventually, immediately. And then the federal government announced something that would have been unthinkable 5 years earlier. A voluntary buyback scheme offering to purchase flood-prone properties at pre-flood valuations and pay the owners to leave permanently. The government was formally acknowledging that some homes in Lismore should not be rebuilt, that some land should not be owned. By late 2025, buyback applications had closed, entire suburbs had begun to empty out, and the Lismore City Council was engaging consultants to plan the future use of land that used to have homes on it. In Australia's property culture, where owning your home is the closest thing we have to a national religion, the government paying people to abandon their houses is not a policy footnote. It is a cultural earthquake. And Lismore is where it is already happening. Number 2, Moranbah, Queensland. In December 2012, the median house price in Moranbah, Queensland, was $740,000. For context, that made a basic 3-bedroom house in a coal mining town in the middle of nowhere, Queensland, more expensive than equivalent properties in most Sydney suburbs at the time. Weekly rents exceeded $3,000 for standard homes. Investment seminars across the country were spruiking Moranbah as a guaranteed growth market. Everyday Australians, teachers, nurses, small investors, took out massive mortgages on the strength of a coal boom that financial analysts were describing as structural and permanent. It wasn't permanent. The coal price crashed. Mining companies cut production, then cut workforces. The fly-in, fly-out model that had inflated demand evaporated almost overnight. Businesses shuttered. Families fled. Hundreds of homes sat vacant on streets that had, just months earlier, had waiting lists of tenants. By 2015, the median house price had fallen to approximately $310,000, a 58% collapse in under 3 years. The investors who had bought at the top were not just in negative equity. They were underwater by hundreds of thousands of dollars on properties in a town with no demand, no rental income, and no foreseeable recovery timeline. The real estate agents who had described Moranbah as a guaranteed growth market had moved on. The investment seminar promoters had moved on. The mining companies had moved on. The investors were left holding mortgages on houses nobody wanted. Moranbah has partially recovered since SARS. Today's prices are roughly back in the low to mid $300,000. But the scar tissue is permanent. Nobody forgets. Nobody who was there in 2013 buys a mining town investment property without knowing exactly how fast it can all go wrong. Moranbah didn't just lose property value. It destroyed the confidence of an entire generation of regional property investors. That damage doesn't show up on a price graph. Number 1. Wittenoom, Western Australia. There is no property market in Wittenoom, Western Australia. Not because demand is low, not because prices are unattractive, not because buyers have concerns about the infrastructure or the local economy. You cannot legally buy or sell property in Wittenoom because the town no longer legally exists. From 1937 to 1966, the Australian Blue Asbestos Company, later absorbed into CSR, mined chrysotylite or blue asbestos from the Wittenoom Gorge. Over those 3 decades, more than 3 million tons of asbestos tailings were dumped around the town. The roads were paved with asbestos waste. Children played in sandpits made of asbestos. Families lived in homes surrounded by deadly fibers that the mining company and the government knew were lethal far earlier than they ever publicly admitted. Around 20,000 people lived or worked in Wittenoom during that period. More than 2,000 of them are confirmed dead from mesothelioma and asbestos-related lung cancer. Researchers predicted deaths among women who lived there would continue rising until at least 2030. The Western Australian government spent decades trying to empty the town. It removed the postcode. It stripped the name from official maps. It cut off services. And still, a handful of residents refused to leave. Because it was their home? Because they had nowhere else to go? Because leaving felt like admitting something they weren't ready to admit? The last resident was forcibly removed by the state in September 2022. Demolition of the remaining structures began in May 2023. Today, Wittenoom is not a ghost town. It is an asbestos management area, the largest contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere, surrounded by warning signs in red and yellow that read, "Contaminated site, do not enter." What was once a town of 20,000 people is now a legal hazard zone that the government is still trying to make safe, decades after the last worker left. There will never be a property market in Wittenoom. Not in 2026. Not in 2036. Not ever. The land itself has been poisoned beyond reclamation, and the people who built their lives there paid the price. With their lungs, their lives, and in some cases the lives of their children, for an industry that knew exactly what it was doing and chose profit over every single one of them. That is what it looks like when a property market doesn't just collapse. That is what it looks like when it is erased. So what is the thread that runs through all 10 of these places? What connects Wittenoom's asbestos ruins to Lismore's flood-scoured streets to Colley's ticking clock to Grantham's empty slabs? It is this. Every single one of these towns had a reason to exist. And when that reason disappeared, or was poisoned, or was scheduled for removal, The property market didn't negotiate. It didn't gradually adjust, it stopped. Because property isn't just about bricks and land and square meters. It is about belief. Specifically, the belief that someone will be here tomorrow who wants what you have today. The moment that belief breaks, so does everything else. And here is the part that should make every Australian property owner think carefully. The forces that destroyed these 10 towns, the end of coal, the collapse of commodity prices, the acceleration of flooding, the contamination of land, are not isolated edge cases. Over 2 million Australian homes, approximately 17% of all residential properties in this country, carry some degree of flood risk. The coal transition is not hypothetical in Collie. It has a date. Climate stress on regional towns is not a future projection. It is a present reality. The story of Wittenoom is extreme. But the story of Lismore is not. The Australians who lost everything in Moranbah were not foolish people. They were rational investors who trusted the information they were given. The families who moved to Harpatoon were not reckless. They were following the work, the same way Australians have always done. The people who stayed in Lismore loved their city, the same way you love yours. Cheap doesn't always mean opportunity. Sometimes cheap means the market has already done the maths and arrived at a number that reflects the truth everyone is trying not to say out loud. In 10 towns across this country, the truth is already out there. In empty streets and flooded foundations and warning signs and government buyback checks, the question isn't whether this can happen somewhere else. The question is, which town is next? And whether anyone there is watching closely enough to notice before it's too late. If this video made you see something differently, share it. Not because of the algorithm, because someone you know might be about to make a decision about a regional property. And what they just watched might be the most important 20 minutes they spend before they sign anything.